First, let me take a drink of water.
Ladies and gentlemen of the House, the chair needs your help.
I'd like to begin with
Did I set my speech down?
Now, I'm not smart enough to figure out how they do this.
Republican staffers stole fire.
My minute won't start until everybody shuts up.
Welcome back, young scholars. This is the first video on the legislative branch. The big questions you should be able to answer after watching this video are: first, how is Congress structured? What are the similarities between the House and the Senate, and what are the differences? And second, what roles do members of Congress carry out? Let's answer that first question. How is Congress structured? What are the similarities between the House and the Senate, and what are the differences? First, we have to understand Article 1 is the section of the Constitution that deals with the legislative branch, and it establishes a bicameral or two-house legislature. Bicameral is a Latin word meaning two houses, and these two houses are the House of Representatives and the Senate. And these two houses together have the power to make laws. So here's a picture of the House of Representatives. Can you count how many members there are there? All right, I'll give you some help. There are 435 members in the House of Representatives. In the House, there is proportional representation, which means representation is determined based upon state population. Each state gets at least one representative. So the states with the smallest populations, which in this case are Montana and Wyoming, North and South Dakota, Vermont, and Alaska, they only have one representative in the House of Representatives. They have two senators, but only one House member because they have very small populations. The state with the largest population is California. It has 53 representatives in the House. Iowa has 4 current members. The number of representatives change each 10 years after a census, and we'll talk about that in a later video when it comes to the reapportionment process. And today, each district has around 710,000 people, and so on average, that is the number of people each House member represents. Let's talk about the Senate. You can just start doing your counting, or you can just remember there are 100 senators. Each state gets 2 representatives, and this is known as equal representation. Here you can see a map, and the red dots represent Republican senators, the blue dots represent Democratic senators, the yellow dots up here represent independent senators, and you can see most states typically either have 2 Democratic senators or 2 Republican senators. A few have one of each. In terms of the length of term, in the House of Representatives, the length of term is 2 years. 2 years for a member of the House. In the federal government, there's no such thing as term limits except for the president, who's subject to only 2 4-year terms. But in the House, you can run for as many terms as you want. And so this is former Representative John Dingell from Michigan. He served in the House of Representatives for 59 years. He was the longest serving member of the House. He was reelected 29 times and served those 2-year terms, finally passing away in office. And now the person who represents this district outside of Detroit is none other than Debbie Dingell, John Dingell's wife. There are advantages and disadvantages to having such a short term. The disadvantage is that members are pretty much constantly campaigning, which means they'll spend less time governing and writing laws and passing laws and doing the kind of things that we expect our representatives to do because they're constantly worried about fundraising and kissing babies and shaking hands. The advantages, though, of having 2-year terms is that the House really is the most democratic body in our government and was designed by the founders that way. The House is certainly accountable. Everyone's always constantly concerned that each vote they will take would potentially have repercussions in the next election, which is coming right around the corner. It's important that we allow the people, if they're not happy with their elected representatives, to make change. When it comes to the Senate, a senator serves a So a 6-year term. So it's important to remember, House members serve 2-year terms. The president serves a 4-year term. Senators serve 6-year terms. And then federal court judges serve lifetime appointments. There are no term limits on the Senate. So this is Senator Robert Byrd from West Virginia. He served 51 years in the Senate, the longest serving senator. He was reelected to the Senate 8 times. There are advantages and disadvantages. The disadvantages is there's less public accountability than in the House. So you can take a vote maybe in your first or second year of your term and not really worry about the implications. The advantages of having 6-year terms is that there's more time for senators to do the kind of policy making we expect. They're spending less time campaigning. There's a little bit more independence. So in order to serve in the House of Representatives, you must meet 3 qualifications. First, you must be 25 years old. These are the 2 youngest current members of the House of Representatives. That's Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. She's from a district in New York. This is Abby Finkenauer. She's one you might recognize from some commercials. She represents Iowa's 1st Congressional District, which is in the northeastern corner of the state. It includes cities of Cedar Rapids, Dubuque. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is age 29. Abby Finkenauer is age 30. And so they meet that threshold of 25 years old. You must be a citizen for at least 7 years. So this is the Representative Ilhan Omar. She represents a district in Minnesota near Minneapolis. She was born in Somalia. She moved to this country and became a U.S. citizen at age 17, and therefore she meets this requirement. She has been a U.S. citizen for 7 years before serving, and that is the requirement. Third, you must live in the state that you represent. This is the Representative Steve King. He represents currently Iowa's 4th Congressional District, which is in the northwestern part of the state, and he has lived in Iowa's 4th Congressional District nearly his whole life, and so he meets that qualification. For the Senate, senators must be 30 years old. This is the youngest current serving senator. His name is Josh Hawley. He was senator from Missouri. And so Josh Hawley is age 39, and so he meets that 30-year-old requirement. Next to Josh, you will see another young senator back in the day. This is Chuck Grassley, the senator from Iowa. There's what Chuck Grassley looks like today, and that's because Chuck Grassley has been the senator in Iowa for a really long time. He was 46 during his first term. He will be 89 by the end of his 7th term, which is coming up in the year 2022. So you must be a U.S. citizen in order to be a senator for at least 9 years. This is Mazie Hirono. She was born in Japan. She is a senator from Hawaii. She became a U.S. citizen in 1959 when Hawaii became a state, and therefore she qualifies under this requirement. You must live in the state that you represent. This is the Senator Joni Ernst from Iowa. She has lived in Iowa nearly her whole life, therefore she qualifies for this requirement. And you don't need to live in a particular state or district your whole life. In fact, some people move to a state or district in order to qualify under this requirement and then run for office. Something that is true of both the House and the Senate, a similarity, is that they're both involved in the lawmaking process.
I'm just a bill. Yes, I'm only a bill. And I'm sitting here on Capitol Hill.
So both the Senate and the House can start a law. Now they have to do so within the limits of their constitutional power. As we learned, there are limitations to the powers of Congress, and so can't just write a bill about anything. You have to write a bill within the limits of your powers. But the bill must pass both the House and the Senate before it is given to the president to be signed into law. This power of initiating laws includes the power of appropriation. What does appropriation mean? Appropriation is all about the money. When Congress appropriates money, they are allocating public money. And this is something that can be done by both the House and the Senate. And sometimes this is referred to as the power of the purse. This is the current Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, and she has a lot of power over how taxpayer money is allocated across the country. Both the House and the Senate have certain special exclusive powers. Let's start with the House of Representatives. First, all bills for raising revenue, in other words, when the federal government imposes new taxes, those bills must start in the House of Representatives. The framers recognized that the power of taxation was a very important one, and they wanted to give that power exclusively to the most accountable body of government. And so the House of Representatives, all bills for raising revenue must start in the House. Second, the House of Representatives gets to select the president if there is no majority in the Electoral College. Now, this does not happen very often. It potentially could happen if there was ever a tie, 269 to 269. One time it did happen was in the election of 1824. Here you can see the four men who were vying for the presidency. And if you just look at the number of electors each candidate received, it would seem to me that Andrew Jackson would win this election and become the president. However, that is not how it worked because none of these individuals received a majority, and therefore, who got to select the president? The House of Representatives. And who did the House of Representatives select? John Quincy Adams. And as you can imagine, Andrew Jackson was pretty salty about that.
Today, we will make history, delivering articles of impeachment against the President of the United States for abuse of power and obstruction of the House.
That was Nancy Pelosi, the current Speaker of the House, describing how the House of Representatives had issued articles of impeachment against President Trump. And that is another special exclusive power that the House possesses. They are the ones who write up and vote on articles of impeachment against high-ranking officials. You have to get a majority, so 50% of the House members have to vote in order to impeach. Now, when it comes to the special exclusive powers of the Senate has the power to ratify or approve all treaties. Again, this does not happen very often that they reject treaties. Oftentimes they ratify treaties, but sometimes they do reject them. The most famous case was the Treaty of Versailles following World War I, which the Senate defeated. The Senate also confirms all presidential appointments. Once a president nominates either a member of the cabinet or an ambassador or a federal judge, it is the Senate who has the responsibility and duty to hold hearings to determine whether that person is qualified and ultimately to vote up or down on the person the president has selected for that appointment. The Senate also has the power to select the vice president if there is no majority in the Electoral College. Again, this happens so infrequently. In fact, it's only happened once. Richard M. Johnson was the only vice president selected by the Senate in 1836, and I don't even know who the president at the time was. And then finally,
will all senators now stand or remain standing and raise their right hand? Do you solemnly swear that in all things appertaining to the trial of the impeachment of Donald John Trump, President of the United States, now pending, you will do impartial justice according to the Constitution and laws, so help you God?
That was Chief Justice John Roberts administering the oath to the 100 senators at the beginning of the impeachment trial for President Trump. And that is the role that the Senate plays in a impeachment. They act as the jury, and they ultimately vote whether or not to convict or not convict. In order to remove a president, there has to be 67 senators, or 2/3 of the senators have to vote guilty to remove the president. And in the case of President Trump was acquitted by a wide margin. In terms of leadership, the House of Representatives is led by the Speaker of the House. The current Speaker of the House is Nancy Pelosi. The Speaker of the House is elected every 2 years. So every 2 years, the party that has the majority gets to elect a Speaker of the House. The same is true of the Senate. Every 2 years, once the Senate majority is determined, the party that has the power gets to elect a majority leader. The current majority leader in the Senate is Mitch McConnell, a senator from Kentucky. Another similarity between the House and the Senate is that they are both organized into a variety of different committees. Members at the beginning of each term are assigned to those committees, and those committees have designated areas of responsibility. For instance, you have the House Agricultural Committee, the Senate Budget Committee, the House or Senate Homeland Security Committee. It's really important if you are a member of Congress which committee you get assigned to. For instance, if you're a senator from Iowa, it makes sense that you try and get on the Senate Agricultural Committee because a number of your constituents would really care about those issues. So assignments to committees are made by the party leaders. So both the majority and minority leaders assign their members to committee positions, and there are certain committees that are considered more prestigious than others, and then ultimately within the committee there's a lot of seniority. So the goal is to try and become either a ranking member or ultimately the committee chair, because that person has the most power within the committee. What roles do members of Congress carry out? So when it comes to Congress, there are really three primary roles that legislators play. First, that role of policymaking, of lawmaking. They establish a course of action for government by crafting legislation, voting on legislation. That is a role that we'll get into a lot more deeply in a subsequent video. Second, they do something called casework, or sometimes it's called constituent services. And what this means is they provide services to their constituents who are in need of assistance, who need help. This is the current member of Congress representing Iowa City, Dave Loebsack, and this is on his website where he's talking about trying to help people that he represents. One of the things that members of Congress do in their casework is they're responsible for nominating applicants for service academies. So if you are intending to apply to either the Military Academy at West Point or the Naval Academy at Annapolis or the Air Force Academy in Colorado Springs, you have to receive a nomination from either a member of the House or a member of the Senate. We just mentioned a word that's really important. I want to make sure we have a definition of it. A constituent. So a constituent is a person who lives in a representative's home district or state. You are a constituent of Iowa's 2 senators. You are a constituent of the representative of Iowa's 2nd congressional district because you live in their district or you live in their state. The third role that members of Congress play is the oversight role. So in this role, Congress is reviewing, monitoring, supervising the executive branch. They're kind of like the cop of the executive branch, making sure that executive bureaucracy is functioning smoothly, there's no waste, abuse, fraud. And one thing that Congress can do is they have these committees, and those committees can hold hearings where they subpoena witnesses, where they demand records from either heads of executive agencies or people who have expertise in certain areas. So after watching this video, you should be able to answer these 2 big questions. First, how is Congress structured, and what are the similarities between the House and the Senate, and what are the differences, and what roles do members of Congress carry out? As always, thanks for watching. Two chambers.